What is up, guys? Welcome back to another React beginner project video, and in this video we are going to build a simple tic-tac-toe application in React. Alright, so this is going to be a simple application as you can see here, and I'm sure you guys know how this game works, right? So we have player X turn, and then player O turn, and then X, and then O, and after someone wins the game, it's going to declare the winner here. So that's going to pretty much be the application. So let's try with O, and there we go, it's showing us the winner, that is O. So this is what we're going to build in this video. It's going to be a very basic and going to be a very simple one, and this video is mainly for the beginners who are just starting out with React and just want to do some project tutorial. So let's start by building this application. Alright guys, so the first thing that we're going to do here is we're going to create a folder for our application, and let's name that folder Tic Tac Toe. Alright, and open this folder in any code editor that you want to work with. For me, I'm going to use VS Code, so I'm going to open that up and open that folder, which is right here. Okay, so that's done. Open our terminal right here and then install our React boilerplate. Alright, so we're going to say npx create -react -app, and then we're going to hit the dot. Alright, and if you enter it, what will happen is the npm will install all the React boilerplate that you need inside this tic-tac-toe folder. So let's just hit enter. Alright, so finally the initial React boilerplate is finally installed right here, and now we can pretty much start the server by saying npm start. Alright, and there it is, our initial React template, alright, which looks like this. So this is basically our application right now. So let's come back to our code, and the first thing what we're gonna do here, and I hope you guys know a little bit of React and how these files are structured. Alright, if you have not, if you're completely new and completely a beginner to React, then you can check out my React course here, where I go much in depth to all these files, what are these files here, and you know, all the core basic React stuffs. Alright, I'm not gonna touch it here because since this is more of a project video, I'm more going to talk about and deviate towards how this project is going to be built instead of just sticking to the core basic concepts. Alright, so the first thing what we're going to do here right now is actually delete some of the files that we're not going to need in this project. Alright, if you come to our source here, you're going to see a lot of files here, and this is pretty much really overwhelming. Alright, so what you're going to do is remove some of the files, that is setup test.js. We're going to remove this as well. Logo we don't want. We're going to keep the index.js because that's very important. We're going to remove this app.test.js and also app.css. So just delete that. So all we are left with is app.js, index.css, and index.js. So we're going to come to app.js here, and we're going to remove this logo from here, and we're also going to remove app.css, and we're going to remove everything that is from here. And instead of that, I'm going to add an h1 tag, and inside that I'm going to type tic tac toe. Alright, simple as that. And here I'm going to import React from React. So let's save this, and still we're getting this error, and it's saying failed to compile report web vitals.js, and that's because if you come to index.js, you have this import report web vitals here. Since I deleted that file, we're not going to need this, so let's just remove this and also remove this from here, and that will be pretty much it. Alright, so now it's not showing any errors. So if I go here, alright, and if I refresh this page, let's see. Okay, so we have this tic-tac-toe header right here. Alright, everything is gone because we just removed it right now. Okay, so let me just talk about what is happening right here in our index.js. Alright, so what this application, what this page is actually showing is this index.html. Alright, and if you actually go here and inspect this page, you'll get this HTML right here. Alright, and this is basically our whatever that is inside our index.html. And if you come down here, you have this div tag with the ID of root, and whatever the React code that we are writing, everything is being compiled and actually being injected right inside this div. Alright, and that is being done in index.js with the help of react-dom.render. What this react-dom.render is doing is it is basically injecting our app component, alright, which we have imported right here. And this app component is basically our app.js, and react-dom.render is injecting this component inside our div tag with the ID of root, alright, which is basically this div tag right here. So that is what is happening behind the scenes. But for us, all we need to focus on is inside this source tag and mainly inside this app.js. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do is add our style. Alright, so let's go to our index.css, which is right here. Okay, and this index.css, we are already importing it inside this index.js. Right, so whatever class that you add in this index.css, those classes are going to be applicable to all the components. That's because you have imported this inside the main index.js file, which is basically importing the app component, which contains all the other components that you're going to create. So in our index.css, what I'm going to do is I already have a pre-made CSS code for this application, so I'm just going to paste it right here. What you want to do is I have a link in my description down below, so just go to the description and you will be redirected to my GitHub page. Copy the CSS from that page and just paste it here. Alright, so for the styling, I'm just going to paste everything here. You can just go to the description, copy and paste it right here. Alright, so I'm just going to paste that CSS code here. Okay, so it's not much, just a little bit of code for styling, and I've also added Google font. Alright, and you'll need the internet connection for this font to work. So let's save this CSS, and that will be it. Alright, so whatever class name that I'll be using will be coming from this index.css. Now since that's done, let's close this index.js as well, and let's go to our app.js, which will be our main component for this project. So as you know that React is all about components, alright, and there's going to be 3 components in our application. The first one itself will be app.js, which will be the main component, which will contain everything, including the TIC TAC TOE board as well as the header and all of the stuffs. And then inside this app.js, we're gonna have another component called board.js. Alright, and that component is going to be our main TIC TAC TOE board. And inside that component, we're gonna have another component which is going to be a square component. Alright, these are going to be the single blocks in this TIC TAC TOE board, and these are basically going to be buttons. So let me create a folder inside our source folder, and let's name that folder to components. And inside this folder, I'm going to create 2 files. That is going to be board.js for the board component and square.js for the square component. Alright, and here basically what I'm going to do is create a component. So I'm going to say import React from React, and then I'm going to say function board, and as you can see, we are actually using functional components. In all these, we are using functional components instead of class-based components. Alright, and this is what this video is going to be. Instead of class-based component, we're going to use functional-based component, and instead of the state, we're going to use what is called React hooks in order to play along with the data. So here I'm just going to add a div for now, and let's just export default board. All right, let's just copy this and let's just paste it here. It's the same thing. Instead of board, we're gonna write square, and we're gonna do the same thing here as well. Let's save that, and we have created the two components, board.js and square.js, which doesn't have anything right now, but we're going to create it step by step. So here what I'm going to do is import the board.js component. So I'm going to say import board from, and now I need to actually locate place of this file. Now since this file is inside our components and we are outside of that folder, what I'm going to do is say /components. Now / means the location or the folder which we are in right here, and then we are going inside the components folder, and inside this components folder we are bringing the board.js. all right, or you can just write board, it's the same thing. And here what I'm going to do is just call this component. All right, so I'm going to say board and give a slash at the end. So this is how you actually call a component inside a component. All right, so if you save this and if you go to your application, so yeah, you're gonna get this error saying board, nothing was returned from the render, something error like that, and that is probably because you need to return something inside this function. All right, so we're gonna add a return statement, and inside this we are going to paste our div tag. All right, and we're going to do the same thing inside our square. And now if you look over it, yeah, this is going to work. And in your board.js, let's just add board, and if you go back to your application, you're going to see board right here because you have actually added that component in your app component. All right, and that's why it is being shown right here. All right, so this board component is basically our entire tic-tac-toe board, right? But what makes this board is actually our square component, which is nothing but a button. Okay, so inside this board component, we need to bring the square component inside this board component. All right, now you might say that instead of bringing component, why are not we just adding 9 buttons? All right, we can actually add 9 buttons and just display them with the help of CSS, and it's just gonna look like a tic-tac-toe board, right? But the problem comes when we are doing the functionality. The main motive of React is breaking down a large problem into simple small problems using components and then trying to figure out from there. All right, I hope that makes sense. So what I'm going to do now is bring the square component, import square from, and now since I am actually calling this from the board component, all right, and the board component is inside this folder and the square component is also inside this folder, so unlike in app.js, I'm not going to call this way. I'm just going to write /square. All right, and inside this, instead of this board, what I'm going to do is just write square. All right, this is how you actually call a component, as I said earlier. And then inside our square component, what I'm going to do is create a button. And for now I'm just gonna write X, all right, which is one of the move in tic-tac-toe. So let's save this and let's see if this works or not. And there you go, guys, we have this X right here. So what this means is that now we have our main app component, and app component is bringing our board component, which is bringing this square component right here. Okay, and since you know that we have And since you know that there should be 9 square components inside the tic-tac-toe board, we can actually paste this 9 times and save that. And there you go, we have this 9 buttons right here, and with the help of CSS we can actually make that look like a tic-tac-toe board instead of just vertical buttons. Okay, so let me just first add a small class. So here I'm gonna add a class name, and remember, instead of class in React you have to write class name. Alright, so here I'm gonna write a class name of board. Alright, that's the first thing. And the second one is I'm gonna add another div here, and I'm gonna add a class name of board row. Alright, and what this class does is this is actually going to be the rows. There are going to be 3 rows in the board. Alright, so we're going to paste it 2 times again. Now since there are going to be 3 rows, we're actually gonna, and each row is gonna contain 3 buttons, we're gonna actually copy this 3 squares and we're gonna paste it here. And the same thing, we're gonna do that for the other 2 as well. Alright, so we have these 3 board rows with the 3 square buttons. Alright, if you save this, if you go here, and there you go, you have this board which now kind of looks like the tic-tac-toe board. Alright, and in our square.js, instead of this div in this button, you can actually add a, let's actually add another class name, and all this class name is basically coming from this index.css file. Alright, here what I'm going to do is add another class name of btn, and let's save that, and there you go, now it looks like a complete tic-tac-toe board. Let's also bring this header in the center. Alright, so let's add a class here, and let's set that to header. Alright, so yeah, there you go, now this header is in the center and we have this board set up like this. Okay, now we can call the component square component like this. Alright, there's no problem in doing that, but we're gonna need to assign each of these squares with a position. Alright, because later on what those position will do is it will help us in order to actually select the winner. Alright, in order to choose the winner, how the winner functionality works. So for that, what we need to do is, instead of this square, what we're going to do is we are going to create a function, and we're going to add this function here. So we're going to call a function here, and we're going to say render square, and then here we're going to pass the position of all the squares. Alright, so the first position of the first square is going to be 0. Similarly, here we're going to call the same function but pass another position that is going to be 1, and we're going to keep doing that. Alright, so we are calling the same function render square, but for each of the button or for each of the square we are passing different values right here. Alright, and these values, as I said earlier, is basically going to be the position of our squares in the board. So now we need to actually create this render square function. So I'm gonna come down here and I'm gonna say const render square, and this is basically going to be an arrow function. Alright, and here we're gonna type I, and I is basically the value that you are passing right here. Alright, and here we are going to return the component square. So I'm going to say square right here. Alright, and if you save this, it's going to show the same thing. Alright, nothing's going to change. but now each of the squares right here has a value or has a position assigned to them. All right, and you can actually see that by sending a prop. You know that if you want to send values to the components, you can send that through props, right? So I'm gonna send a prop called value and gonna assign I to it. All right, and if you save this, if you go to square.js, and in your child component, you can whatever prop that you have sent here, all right, you can actually get it through props. Okay, and since the prop name you have sent here is value, you can actually get that here by saying props dot value. Right, if you save this and go here, and now you actually see each of the squares we had assigned a different value. All right, and it is basically showing those values right here. So for this square, the value is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, and I said earlier we need this in order to calculate our winner. All right, so this part is basically done. Now the next thing what we need is that when we actually click these buttons right here, just like in the game of tic tac toe, we either want to show an X or an O, all right, and not these numbers. When you click on this button, it needs to show a value that is going to be X or an O depending on the player. So instead of this number, we need to let it show an X or an Y. And you might be wondering that if you can add an on-click event right here in this button, and just after you place that event, either show X or Y, it's gonna work, right? And that's probably not gonna happen, all right? I mean, you can do that, but again, as I said earlier, you can't calculate the winner. All right, it's going to be very complicated in order to calculate the winner. So what I'm going to do is we need to create a state in our main board.js. All right, and all the child components, which are the square component, is going to interact to this state that we have in our board.js, and that is how we are going to find out the winner of this game. So the way we're going to do that is by creating an array of length 9, all right, because we have 9 buttons in our board. All right, so we're going to create an array of length 9, and we are going to link each array element with the square. All right, I hope that makes sense. We are going to link each array element with the square in such a way that when we click on any of the button, the value of the array element assigned to that button is going to get changed. That's pretty much the logic behind it. So we need to implement that in our code. So the first thing is we need to create the state, and as I said earlier, we are actually using functional components and not a class-based component. If we had been using class-based component, we could have directly said something like state, and we could have worked with that. But since we are using functional component does not allow the use of state. Instead, what it allows you to do is actually allows you to use something called React hooks. All right, and with the help of React hooks, we can actually create the state in our functional component, and the hook which allows us to do that is use state. All right, and this is how we are going to call this function, this hook, in our React. All right, and now we need to create the state. So this is how you actually create the state with the help of hooks. So we're going to say const. It's similar to creating a variable, and we're going to add the square brackets, and inside that we need to add the name of the state or the name of the variable. All right, I'm going to add square. All right, and the next thing is we need to say set square. All right, and I'm going to explain that later on. Equals, and we're going to say use state, and that's pretty much it. All right, this is how you create state in a functional component. So what we're doing is we are creating a state of name square, and this sits square, what it is that you know that state cannot be changed directly, right? You can't mutate the state directly. Even in class-based component, you have something called set state in order to change the state. Similar to that, we have what is called set square, right? And what this set square does is that in order to change, if you want to change this state later on, you can change with the help of set square, and that is it. All right, and then we have this use state hook, which allows you to use state, and inside this bracket, whatever you add here, it's going to be the default value of this state. All right, if you add a number, then this is going to be the default value of this state right here. But as you know, we are actually creating an array of length 9. So what we're going to do here is, for our default value, we're going to say array, and then we're going to add a bracket, and inside that we're going to say 9, because we need the array of length 9, and we're going to add dot, and then say fill, and inside the fill bracket we're going to say null. All right, so what this code is doing is that it's just saying and initialize an array of length 9 and fill all the values, all the array elements with the value of null. So our square state right now looks something like this. Okay, we have created our state with the help of use state hook, and we have also initialized it as an array of length 9, and everything inside that is set to null, okay, at first, because those values should only change when we actually click these buttons. All right, so what we're going to do here is, instead of this sending just the value I here, we're going to send square of I. All right, now instead of sending the value or the location, we are sending the array element that is attached to that particular square. And if you save this up and go over here, now you're not going to see anything, because as I said earlier, initially the array is set to null, so everything is null. And right now if you click this button, you're not going to see anything, because we have also not created that functionality as well. So what I need to do now is, when I click this button, somehow I need to change my state. All right, whatever array element that is linked to this button, I need to change the value of that. So how am I supposed to do that? Now, as you know, these buttons are basically the child components of the board component. All right, these are the square component, and my state, the state I have built, my state is actually inside the board component. So I'm clicking on a child component and changing the state of the parent component right here. So the way this works is actually sending a prop in our child component. All right, so in our square, what we're going to do is we're going to add a prop of on click, and we're going to set that to a function. And what this function will do is actually call another function called handle click. All right, we haven't created this function, we're going to create it later on. And let's send the I here. Okay, so what we're basically doing here is we are sending a prop which is on click. All right, we're sending it in our square component, and what this on click prop is doing is that is calling the handle click function. All right, and this handle click function is going to contain all the code that's going to change the values of the state. And in our square component, we are going to add an on click listener. All right, and this means that when you click on this button, it's going to run a function, and that function is going to call props dot on click. All right, so let's understand how this code works. So we have this button right here, all right, the square component, and it has an event listener called on click. Now when you click on this button, this on click event listener is going to trigger, and it's going to run a function that's going to call props dot on click function. Alright, because we are passing this onClick function as a prop here. So when you click this button, it's going to listen to this event, and this is basically going to call props.onClick function, and props.onClick function that you have passed here as a prop, and this is going to call the handleClick function. So from the child component, we are basically calling a function that is present in the parent component. Const handleClick equals, and let's say I, something like this. And for now, let's just console log I. If you save that, if you go to your app, and let's just inspect this because we have console logged it, and there you go. Every time you click on this button, it is console logging the position that is attached to these buttons. Alright, which means that the handleClick function is working. Okay, so by creating an event, or by creating an event on the child component, we are actually running a function that is present in the parent component. Now instead of console logging I, we need to actually change our state. So let's create a variable here. Let's say const squares, and don't get confused this variable with this. This is a square and this is squares. Alright, these are different, and we're gonna set that to square, which is our state dot slice. Alright, and what this slice function does is that whatever array that there is inside the square, whatever elements of the array that is there inside the square, it's going to create a copy and then set it to squares. And as you know that this I is basically the position of those buttons. So when we say squares of I, we will get the value of the array that is attached to these buttons as well. So when you click any of these buttons, you want the array element that is attached to this button to change to either X or Y. Alright, so all we need to do is set the squares of I to either X or Y. For now, we're just gonna set that to X, and finally we need to set square, and inside that we're gonna put, alright, because what we're doing right now is copying the state, alright, changing something inside of it, and then setting this newly edited array to our, alright, because as you know that state cannot be changed directly. You cannot change the elements of that array, which is a state, directly. Alright, you're gonna create a copy, and then you're gonna change whatever changes that you need to change, and then again set the new state with the help of set square. Alright, and if you save this, now if you click on this button, you're gonna see that every time you click this button, it's gonna display X on that particular button. Alright, so we are almost halfway there. Now what we need to do is that once we set a button to X, once the X turn is over, then it's O's turn, right? So we need to toggle between the two, somehow create a toggle between the two, and the way we do that is by creating another state, right? And that will actually kind of act like a flag variable, right? So we're gonna say const, and let's set that to X itself, and here let's say set X, and we're gonna say use state, and for the initial value I'm gonna set that to true. Alright, and true is basically a boolean value. And now what we need to do here is that we need to check for X. Alright, we're going to use a ternary operator, and it's going to work something like this. We're actually saying whether the X value is true or false. If the value of the X is true, set the squares of I, set this value to X, else set this value to Y. and that's it. All right, we are checking for the value of x. If the value of x is true, set this value to x. If the value of x is false, set this value to y. All right, and once it does this, we also need to change the value of this x right here. All right, so we're going to set x to not x. All right, so for the first time, what will happen is that x value will be true. All right, so it's going to come down here and it's going to say, hey, is the value of x is true? And for the first time, it's going to be true, right? So it's going to set the value of this square right here to x. All right, so once that happens, we want this x value to be false now, right? So that the next time it's going to set to y. Oh, I'm sorry, it's going to set to o. All right, and that is the code which is doing it right here. All right, once this setup is done, we are actually changing the value of x to not x, which means that if the value of x is true, we are changing the value of x to false. If the value of x is false, then we are changing this value of x to true. So if you save this and if you come back to our app here, and now if you click on this button, first time it's going to set to x, and now since the value of this x is changed to false, the second time you click on any of the button, it's gonna give O. The third time it's gonna give X, fourth time O, and this is how we are actually toggling through X and O. Alright, so that now that this thing is done, we need to take care of another thing, alright, which is once you set any of the button to either X and O, you don't want to change that again. Alright, because that's how the game of tic-tac-toe works, is once you set this button to X, you can't set that to O again. Alright, once you set to X, it's set to X, you can't change that. So we need to set that as well, and the way we do that is by adding a simple code right here, and we're going to check for if squares of I equal to null. All right, so squares of I is basically you know that the value of the array of that button that you had clicked, if that is actually set to null, if the value is null, if there is nothing in that button, then do all this stuff, you know, set the square value to either X or O. If this condition is false, it means that there is actually a value inside it, it's either X or it's either O. If there is a value, then do not go with this code. Alright, do not execute this code. Instead, what we're gonna do is we're gonna alert, and then we're gonna say can't do that. Alright, something like that. And if you go again, if you refresh this page, alright, now if you click on this button again, it's gonna give you alert and it's gonna say can't do that. Alright, because this is how this application should work. You cannot change the value of X or the value of O that has already been set. Okay, so now the game is actually working. The final thing that we need to do now is actually set the winner. Alright, so in order to calculate the winner, we need to actually create a function that is going to calculate winner. So we need to create that function somewhere over here. So we're gonna say function calculate winner. Alright, and we also need to pass square. Alright, so now I'm gonna paste a code. You can actually copy that, alright, which is this right here. This is basically a variable which is lines that is set to array, and inside that it has multiple arrays, alright, and inside those arrays you have these numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So basically, what are these numbers? There are 8 of them, alright, and these are basically the position of the winning moves. So you know that there are 8 ways of winning this game. So basically, this lines, this arrays, this position right here is all the winning moves that are there. So in order to check for the winner, what we have to do is we have to loop through each of these arrays right here. There are 8. So we're going to loop through each of the 8 arrays, and we need to check if the value that are in these positions are same, all right, either x or y, or either x or o. If that's it, then you have the winner. If not, then you don't have the winner. So yeah, so how are we going to do that? So let's go down here, and as I said earlier, we're going to loop through all of these 8 arrays. So we're going to use something called for loop. So we're going to use for loop. So I'm going to say for, and then I'm going to say let I equals 0 and I less than lines dot length, and lines dot length is basically the length of this array. All right, so 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8, so the length of the array is 8, but since I'm starting this I from 0 and I less than length, lines dot length means that I should be less than 8, so I can go up to 7. So we're starting from 0 till 7, all right, and then I plus plus. And here we're going to do some destructuring. We're going to say const, then we're going to write a square bracket, and inside this we're going to add a comma b comma c, all right, and we're going to set that to lines of I. So what are we doing in this code? This const bracket abc is basically a way of destructuring, all right. So for the first loop, when I is set to 0, lines of I is basically our first element, all right, because you know that the index of array always starts from 0, all right. That's why we set this I to 0. Lines of I is basically when I is set to 0, lines of I is basically this array right here, and it has 3 things inside of it. It has 0, 1 and 2, and 0 1 2, these are, as I said earlier, these are the winning moves, all right. So what we are doing in this line here is we are actually setting this 0 1 2 to a, b and c. So right now a is 0, b is 1 and c is 2, all right. For the next loop, when I is set to 1, we're gonna look through this array right here and set the a to 3, b to 4 and c to 5. As I said earlier, these are the positions, all right, winning move positions. And now we need to check if these winning positions are filled with x or o, all right. So we have these winning positions here, and we need to check that in our array all these positions, the value in all those positions are either filled with x or o. And we also need to check for null, because you know that in our array values there can either be x or o or null, and when the value is null you don't want to declare the winner, all right. So we also need to check for that. So in order to do that, we're gonna say if, and we have passed our array in this argument, right, the squares. So first we're gonna check for null, and all we have to do is say if squares of a, all right, and we're gonna say and this code right here, it checks for null. If there is a null, then it's gonna return false, and the if statement is not gonna execute, all right. And then we need to check if the values present inside these positions are all x or all y, all right. So the way we're gonna do that is by saying squares of a equal to squares of b and squares of b equal to squares of c, right. So this line of code, this block of code here, what it's doing is that it's checking whether the values that are present inside these positions are all x or all o. So let's say that the value in the position a is x, then it's checking whether the value inside the position b is also x, and the this is going to be a, and the value inside the position c is also going to be x. So it's checking for that, all right. So if all the 3 values are x, then only we are going to declare the winner, and we are also checking for null. Value inside the b is null, and let's say there is a value in a and the value in the position b is null. So what will happen is that although this will be accepted, the squares of L will be accepted, but this code right here is gonna be rejected because there is a value in the square A but there is a null in the square B, so this is not going to work, and then you're gonna come out of the if block without executing the code inside of it. Alright, so this is how we are going to check for the winner. And once this condition is satisfied, alright, once if all the values inside the position are same, either X or O, then you have the winner. Alright, and we're going to return that here. We're going to return the winner, so we're going to say squares of A. Alright, so even if you return squares of B or squares of C, it's going to be the same, alright, because the winner is the same. Alright, the value inside of it are the same. So we're going to return squares of A, which is our winner. If this condition is not satisfied, then we're just going to return null. Alright, so if you have the winner, once this condition is satisfied, it's going to return the winner. Else, if not satisfied, then finally we're just going to return the null. Calculate winner function is done. We need to create a variable here. Let's say const and set that to winner. Alright, and we need to set this to calculate winner function, and inside this we need to pass this square. Alright, so let's send the square, and that's it. Alright, because this calculate winner function will be expecting a value, and that is what we are passing right here. And the reason we are directly calling this inside this functional component is because whenever we click a button, this function is going to be re-rendered. Alright, and once this function gets re-rendered, every time it's gonna call calculate winner function. So every time we are clicking the button, this statement is gonna call this function, and every time this function runs, this block of code also runs. That is going to check the winner, because we have to listen to the winner in every move, right? So that is why we are actually writing this code directly inside this function. So after this happens, we're also going to create another variable called status. Alright, and we're going to check for winner. Alright, so this function right here, every time this function is called, it is going to return two things. Either it's going to return a winner or it's going to return null, because that is how we have written the code right here. Alright, it's either going to return the winner or it's either going to return null, and that value is going to be stored in the winner. So we're going to check for that. So we're going to say if winner, and if the winner is null, then this statement is going to be false. If the winner has a value that's going to be X or O, then this statement right here is going to be true. Alright, so if there is a winner, then we're going to set the status to winner, and then set that to winner. Alright, which is this, and this is basically the ES5 way of combining the strings with the value. And if there is no winner, then we're just going to display whose turn it is. Alright, it's either X turn or it's either O's turn. So I'm going to say status equals to, and then going to say player turn, and so it's either going to be X turn or it's either going to be O's turn. Alright, so we're going to check for that. As you know that we have set a state in order to do that. We're going to use a ternary operator. So if the X value is true, then it's X turn. If the X value is false, then it's O's turn. Alright, and we don't need to change the value of X here because it's already being changed every time you hit the button. Alright, and we're going to use that in order to display the player's turn here. Alright, so if you save that, and since we have set the status value, and we're going to display it here, so inside our curly braces, just write status and it's going to display whatever the value that is present inside the status. Alright, so if you're going to save that and go here, and there you go, we have the player turn right now. So if you refresh this button, and now let's check this application once and for all. So you have this player turn X. So if you click on any of the squares, it's gonna give you X, and then it says player's turn O, and then O, X, O, and there you go. Finally we have the winner. Alright, and it's gonna work for all the 8 moves. So we have X, O, X, O, and yes, X, we have the winner. And let's also try that for O. There you go, we have the winner. So this is how you make this application, although it's a simple one, but it takes a little bit of logic behind the scenes. Alright, so yeah, that's it guys. So I hope you like this video. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one.